So what I'll do is I'll move the general attorney update down and just start with the attorney training. Kathy and I talked about just a couple topics that have been coming up fairly frequently lately, and thought I would just talk to the board briefly about a few of these. And I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. Give me just a second here. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay, so one of the topics that I thought I'd talk to you briefly about, just because it comes up at every board meeting, is confidentiality and how the board members should treat various things that they talk about during the board meeting. And just as a general matter, and one of the other topics I'll talk about this morning is open meetings law. So I'll get into that, but just as a general matter, board meetings are open to the public. The board was created, as you know, by the General Assembly. Its purpose is to protect the public, to do the public's business. So we as a board have to act with that in mind, and everything we do, unless it falls into one of the exceptions, which I'll discuss shortly, should be out in the open, and the public should have access to it. So that typically means, before COVID, it means that we publish notice and then allow anybody that wants to view the meetings to come in and watch. And that, depending on what it is, they don't necessarily have the ability or authority to participate, but they can at least see what's going on and listen to us and have access to all of the discussions, in the board meeting, unless it falls under one of the exceptions. Closed sessions are authorized for various purposes, which I'll get into. There's other exceptions that the statute allows, but the primary ones that this board will deal with are one that we dealt with this morning: personnel information that allows us to go into closed session. And those are all the decisions regarding employment, compensation, bonuses, and specific to individual employees. So if you were, as the board, to discuss just a general policy about employees, that would need to be done in open session. Anything pertaining to a certain person would need to be you would need to go into closed for that. And then those matters, once you discuss them in closed session, they shouldn't be discussed once you get out of closed session, even if it's with staff, because they weren't a party to the closed session. Now, you can bring outsiders into a closed session if you need to. If it's required that you discuss a certain matter with an employee, and it's sensitive and it's a matter of personnel matter that you need to go into closed session on, you can bring them in. So it's not limited to just the board. And that leads me into the second one, and that is bringing a lawyer in to a closed session to discuss, threatened or pending litigation. Excuse me. This was done at multiple board meetings when the dry needling litigation was going on. I remember at least one instance where the lawyers handling the litigation of that matter would come to the board meeting, they would wait their turn, go into closed session, and then give the board a full update. And what that does is that just protects all the attorney-client privileged information related to the litigation. So that would be another instance where the board members will be expected not to talk about any of that stuff once the closed session is over, because it really frustrates the purpose of going in and could potentially harm the board in any pending litigation if that information was released outside of the closed session. We also deal with investigatory and disciplinary matters. That actually is not specifically addressed in the open meetings law as an exception, but it falls under the exception of other matters defined by law that have to be discussed in closed session. And where that comes from is our statute, both in the PT Practice Act and the board rules, say that any and all matters and materials related to an investigation of a licensee by the board or the investigative committee is confidential and not subject to any discovery request. It's not subject to public records request, and can't be released by the board, the committee, or anyone unless and until the board renders a decision on that matter, or if it's entered into evidence at a board hearing. So if the licensee were to request a formal board hearing, come to you as the board, and you'd have a hearing. If the board or the licensee enters information into evidence, then it would be not confidential anymore, it'd be a public record at that point. A couple other things that we commonly deal with that remain confidential. I remember our last meeting we dealt with this. Any criminal history record checks that we receive in our applications. There's lots of laws, both state and federal, that deal with not disclosing that information. So that has to be done in a closed session, as well as you may have heard the board or the investigative committee dealing with licensees who enter into a program that deals with either mental illness or substance abuse in an effort to rehab that licensee. That usually happens after a complaint is filed, and the licensee, if that's the basis of the complaint, the licensee is given an opportunity to enter into one of those programs to address the issues that were brought up in the complaint. And if he or she does that, the investigatory process pauses to allow them to enter into that program. The Board of Nursing is currently administering that for us. So it's turned out to be, as far as I'm concerned, a good relationship with them, because they have a lot of licensees and many more licensees in the program than we do, and are just used to doing it. So we work with them to provide the program to our licensees, and any and all information related to that program remains confidential. So you may wonder, well, what happens if we go into closed session and a board member does talk about what happened in that closed session outside of the meeting? The open meetings law doesn't say what the liability is, or it doesn't even address the issue of talking about confidential matters outside the meeting. The general consensus among lawyers who practice in this area is that while it's not expressly illegal to disclose that information, since it frustrates the purpose of going into closed session in the first place, it's obviously not allowed. If someone was harmed in some way by the disclosure of that information, it is possible that a board member could be held civilly liable in court over releasing the information outside of the closed session. And in addition to that, and the bottom part of that slide there talks about there are other statutes that do provide remedies and liability for board members who remedies against board members and liability for board members who release confidential information. That would be the criminal records law and some other laws, and also just the general tort theory that a board member could be sued on if they release that information and someone was harmed by it. So that leads me into the open meetings law in general, and what it does is it basically the underlying premise of any agency, county, city, any public board in North Carolina is and was enacted and created to conduct the business of the people of the state of North Carolina. So understanding that, you can understand why everything has to be open to them. And it's just the public policy. This is the opening paragraph of the open meetings law. It goes on to in 93B, it defines what an occupational licensing board is. And in 1951, the General Assembly enacted our board, which is a public agency which falls under the open meetings law. And as a result, the public has the right to attend any and all meetings. At those meetings, you can, as you know, go into closed session and keep things from the public, but it has to fall into one of the authorized exceptions. Any meeting of the board has to be noticed in advance. And our board does a good job of meeting all those requirements. There are different requirements for meetings based on what kind of meeting it is. In certain circumstances, the board would need to hold special meetings. If something were to come up and you have enough notice to provide to hold a special meeting, you can do that. And the definition of a special meeting is simply a meeting that's not one of your usual regularly scheduled meetings. So if we were to hold a meeting in next month about some particular subject that we needed to discuss that wasn't of a particular emergency, that would be a special meeting, and the statute lays out certain things you have to do to provide proper notice for those. And then the other kind of meeting, other than the regular meeting and a special meeting, is an emergency meeting. So if some urgent thing, something were to happen and there's an urgent matter that would need to be discussed, then the notice requirements are relaxed because there are a certain number of days you have to post a notice. And obviously, if there's an emergency, you can't meet that. But the statutes still allow public bodies to meet in an emergency situation. There are certain things you have to do. If there is a list of people who have requested notice of the meetings, which happens a lot for counties and cities, you have to contact those people. You have to make them aware. You have to essentially post it as quick as you can in your usual meeting place, and go through a couple other steps to make sure the public is aware of the meeting, even though it's an emergency. One thing that people often wonder is, what happens at committees, or what happens at a gathering of board members that isn't the full board, or what happens if there's a gathering of the full board and it's not really for the purpose of talking about official business. So the open meetings law does describe what an official board meeting is. And it's basically the simultaneous communication of the board members, and it has to be a majority of the board members. So that's one of the things I was talking about this morning, that if we have a committee or a task force or whatever meeting it may be, as long as there's not a majority of the board members present, we don't have to go through the notice requirements. We don't have to abide by the open meetings law, allow the public in, and all that sort of thing. So that's kind of an important thing to remember. If we have a committee where there's 5 members present, then that's technically an official meeting, and we have to abide by all of the notice requirements, take the minutes, do everything that we do and are doing today for an official meeting. I've talked about committee meetings a little bit. As long as we keep it under the majority of the board, it's fine. You can discuss any business that you want. I think the idea is, since it's less than a majority, you can't take any official action. So you would have to take anything that you discuss back to the full board meeting for any formal approval. And that formal approval would be subject to people being on notice and being able to attend the meeting. This isn't so much of an issue with our board, but I do know for city council board meetings and for county meetings, they're constantly worried about receptions and holiday parties and that sort of thing, because what what tends to happen is the full board will be there and they start talking about official business. And that is a constant source of heartburn for, I know, county managers in my prior experience. They get the board together for a retirement reception and everybody wants to talk about county business at these things. And that's technically, if that comes up, it's technically a formal official meeting that has to be noticed and all that kind of stuff. So as long as the purpose of the meeting isn't for official business and you don't go in and talk about official business there, then all the board can get together and have a dinner or a retirement reception for no problem. There is an exception in the statute for that. So that's kind of my spiel on open meetings and confidentiality. It's pretty, I think you probably already all knew this, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just have to kind of be careful when you're away from the formal meeting that you don't discuss official meeting business if there are more than, if there's a majority there. And then the last topic that Kathy and I have discussed a good bit during COVID, especially, is telehealth. And it's mostly related to incoming questions to her that she often would run by me because there's been such an increase of telehealth during COVID with people being away from the office and wanting to keep their distance. There are lots and lots of resources on telehealth, particularly within the last 10 to 12 months out there for you to look at they provide all sorts of tips and guidance to PTs who are looking into telehealth and how to deal with it. So what I'm going to touch on is just some of the legal implications that we've had to address here recently. And I think the most important and the biggest one have to do with jurisdiction and boundaries of states and countries as it pertains to licensing and where you're licensed and where you can provide PT services. So if I'm a PT and I have a patient if I'm in Raleigh and my patient's in Charlotte or Cary or wherever in North Carolina, then there's really no jurisdictional issue there. You're licensed in North Carolina, you can provide PT services to anyone in North Carolina, and that's not an issue. But what has happened here, particularly recently, is we get these questions from licensees, and they say, I'm in my second example there, it says I'm in Charlotte and a lot of my patients live just across the line in South Carolina, and they just come to my office usually. But now with COVID, we really want to try to do a lot of this by Zoom, and I think I can provide it in a competent way. And I'm just not sure if I can do it because they're in South Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. I have got a North Carolina PT license. Well, the answer to that is, and what they always have to consider is that the therapy happens, the PT is happening where the patient is. So if the patient is in South Carolina, it doesn't really matter if you've seen them before, if you've treated them in your North Carolina clinic. You need to have a South Carolina PT license in order to provide that therapy in South Carolina, since that's where the patient is. There's been other issues with schools. North Carolina, PT in North Carolina providing services in a school that the students were coming over from Virginia to attend a school. Can they turn around and continue the PT after the child stays home because of the pandemic in Virginia? I think the answer is no. We had a couple instances where we had to refer licensees to an out-of-state licensing board to find out what they may approve in that situation, and whether there be any exceptions similar to what we have under the state of emergency for a PT to provide services to a student who typically goes to school in North Carolina but lives, in a neighboring state. So that's been probably the biggest issue that we've had to deal with. Another issue arose that I thought was really interesting, and that is what happens if the PT in North Carolina wants to provide telehealth to a patient in Colombia or Honduras or Brazil. The analysis is pretty much the same as it would be for another state. And the question was posed to us, well, if I can't go to, it's easy for me to go to Virginia or South Carolina and find out if this is authorized. But what if the patient out of the country lives in a country that doesn't have PT regulation? What if there are no PT licensees? And this is all done through informally through doctors or in the hospital. What do I do then? Can I then provide telehealth to patients in a foreign country? And this one in particularly gave us some heartburn because we don't know what the guidance is and the regulations are of foreign countries. But I think the answer is for the PT, you really have to be sure that what you're doing is authorized where the physical therapy is happening. And there are very few countries, if any, in the world that don't have some sort of regulation that you would need to get approval from before providing a service. And even though the PT is in North Carolina or in the United States, it's the same. It's the same analysis. The actual service is occurring where the patient is. So finding the regulatory authority in another country where the language is different and there are various different barriers to locating those folks can be difficult, but that burden and that risk is really on the PT that wants to provide the services. And I think it could rise to the level where there'd be some sort of violation of the PT Rules and Practice Act if services are provided out of state without the proper authority to do so. The same thing applies to students. During the pandemic, students were staying home a lot. Professors were opening up their classrooms by Zoom and other electronic means. And if a professor is doing a clinic and students are all over the place, you got the same kind of issues that you would need to consider. I know that Kathy and I talked to a few of the providers, the professors in the PT schools, and they've been pretty careful about this issue, particularly after they realized that there's a jurisdictional issue at hand, because typically the professors in North Carolina, as you know, they have to have a North Carolina license to provide the service. So there's that to consider. The scope and practice rules and standards of care are all the same as if the service were provided in person. There's probably additional liability that PTs will need to deal with related to telehealth, because primarily, and the most obvious reason is you're not there in person. So you have no hands-on examination. You can't see the person. There's a little bit of a disconnect that is not the same for an in-person treatment. I mean, you're not able to be there to really see. A lot of it depends on the quality of the camera and the technology you're using, but you're obviously not able to assess someone as you would be if you were in person. So that alone causes additional risk, in my opinion. And some of these programs and webinars and seminars provided that are available to PTs, they give you a bunch of tips, and these are some of the things I noticed on some of the reading material, and that is, you need to really consider whether or not you need to get consent for your patients to be photographed or videotaped or recorded. And then what do you do with the data that is generated? Is this going on your computer system, and will it be somehow tied to your treatment notes? And you're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that. And I would imagine it would be a lot of a lot of data to have to store if you're recording all of these. What happens when the technology fails in the middle of a treatment? And then are there third parties that are helping with the treatment that are in the room? Because since you're not able to put hands on the patient, or is a family member needed to deal with this, particularly if it's a child in a school situation? And then you're thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away. If there's a medical emergency, how do you deal with that? And those are just some of the things that, they kind of extend beyond the scope of what I looked at as far as legal implications, but they definitely would cause the PT to reconsider whether or not it's worth it, depending on the situation. And that is my presentation of those three topics. And before I go, I'm going to unshare my screen here. And before I go on to the other topics, I'll want to just open the floor to see if anybody has anything they want to ask, have any questions or comments on those topics.
David, I think you've given us some good training on this, reinforcing things that we may have already known, and perhaps enlightened some of us on those topics again. So thank you for that training.
You're welcome. So executive orders, that's next on the agenda under, well, let's see, legislative update and executive orders. This time last year, there were a whole slew of executive orders to have to deal with. Now, the governor is kind of unwinding these executive orders. And there was one submitted recently. Let me pull that one up. I know you probably haven't read it, but I know you've all heard about it, which is Executive Order 215, which just lifted mask requirements, relaxed social distancing requirements. Those things will continue to be relaxed as we move forward, at least we hope, up until the point where the state of emergency is over. And at that point, the governor no longer has the authority to enter into these executive orders because the state of emergency gives him that authority to begin with. So as long as the state of emergency is going on, these new executive orders, I believe, will continue to kind of relax these requirements. There's no new executive orders that have meant much recently to the board as far as processing licenses. We've done all these things that Kathy discussed earlier to increase regulatory flexibility. And now we just have to look at undoing that. As she mentioned, we already have a letter in place to send to licensees as soon as the state of emergency is over. Those licensees that are licensed under the temporary license requirements that we provided for, they'll immediately have no license anymore. So we've got all of that ready to go, emails and hard copy letters to go out, as well as, I think she mentioned, they've been told already that this could be coming at any time. We're just not sure when. The federal legislation on the agenda, there was a bill that's currently in the House. It's actually in a committee that allows the Federal Department of Health and Human Services to provide grants to accredited education programs. And what those grants are intended to do is to increase diversity in the physical therapy profession. They're to be used to provide scholarships or support recruitment and retention of students from underrepresented groups. So that's pending in the House in a committee, and that's a fairly new one. The bill that we discussed back in March, and I think at the last two board meetings, was a bill that dealt with board immunity from any sorts of liability for things that you would do, any action that you took in a board meeting, you know, in your capacity as a board member. There's no update on that one either. When we met in March, it was in a House committee and it's still there. There's been no action. It doesn't seem to me to be very controversial, so I would think it would move forward, but it's currently in the same committee that it was in our last meeting. So those are the two federal bills that are kind of hanging out there that pertain to matters that we deal with. As just a general update, really the only thing I wanted to say was that 12 months ago, we were really gearing up to have to deal with all of these ways that we could be more flexible to allow people to be licensed quicker, to allow online processing of all kind of stuff, including payments and applications. And now it's just a matter of, as those requirements are undone by the governor and by the General Assembly, it's just a matter of you, the board, deciding what you want to keep and what you want to revert back to the way it was, which we discussed this morning. We've been very busy with the investigative committee lately. There are several matters pending before that committee that we constantly are working on. We had a meeting last week and have another one coming up on July 22nd. But as far as urgent matters that I've been working on with the executive director, it's mostly been investigative committee stuff, and then figuring out how we're going to deal with the unwinding of any regulatory flexibility that we've done within the past year. So that's about it for my update.
Okay, thank you, David. Does anyone have questions for David? Hearing none, we'll move on into the agenda. Kathy, I think we're down to J. Is that correct?
I believe so.
All right, take it away.
As always, we've got some standing items here. There are links to APTA's newsletters, APTA NC, if you'd like to review any of those. The fall conference, oh goodness, I've got 2021 on there. Yeah, that is 2021.
That's right.
Wow, getting ahead of myself. They're attempting to have that live in Winston-Salem in October. That was where it was going to be last year, and so they've got that again scheduled for Winston-Salem. So that is an option for people to consider attending. And the board appointments are currently available through the APTA NC, and to be quite honest, I don't know exactly where it is on their website. They sent out a blast email with a licensee list that they received from us, but it closes in 2 days. So if anyone is interested in nominating someone, or if you're someone that's up for reappointment, and soliciting that, you want to get in touch with them to be able to provide that nomination. Okay. And then just some FYIs, it's 100 years of physical therapy. And so some of their celebrations have been derailed. I will say that Colleen Keegan is one of the Mary McMillan lecturers, and she's contacted me because she wanted to talk to me about the compact. So she's going to be speaking at the meeting on innovation. So, sometimes the Maley and the McMillan lectures are always interesting. And if you don't catch them live, you can, read them about the state of PT or what's going on in the future. And then just some upcoming dates for other APTA meetings. And then your chair, Teresa Hale, brought to, requested to post this document that APTA sent out, which was the impact of COVID-19 on the PT profession over a year period of time. And it's nicely done. And so, you may want to take a look at that. And Teresa, if you got comments, certainly feel free to share them.
No, I just thought it was an excellent document with comprehensive data to show employment and job status and impact on our profession.
Yeah, lots of pictures of people in masks. Okay.
Is Debbie available to do the deputy director report?
I'm not sure that she's with us, so I'm gonna do that update. So Debbie's provided a written update, as she always does. And if you've had an opportunity to take a look at that, certainly I could do my best to be available to answer any questions that you might have related to that. There haven't been continuing competence exemption requests, new ones for hardship, so there are none to address at the meeting. We're going to be addressing the rules, permanent rules for AAP in a little bit. They've completed 150 audits. She and Kim Jackson is assisting with those, and it looks like there's just one that's outstanding, and that person is being reviewed by, still being reviewed. As far as, other activities, she's continuing to work on record retention, and then there's another separate report on this, but one of the packets of fingerprints to the SBI was lost through FedEx. And we've been in an ongoing negotiation with them about, how, what we prefer is that they find the package. It was shown as delivered, but nobody seems to know anything about it. So we have had some individuals who had to redo their fingerprints, and that is a full 3-week delay for them. So we've had a few frustrated individuals, but in the year of doing this, we've never had that happen before. So, that was something that we regret happening, but the requirement is that they have to have those results prior to being licensed. So I think we're almost finished, getting those people to resubmit and getting them to the licensure process. So, we really thought we had circumvented some of the difficulties with mail by using FedEx, and, so then we recognized that, nothing is perfect, of course. So, anybody have any other questions about Debbie's report? Okay.
I just want to say that SharePoint has been a much smoother method for approving applications from the board members' perspective. So thank you to the IT team and Debbie's team for putting that together.
Well, I will say thank you for those comments, and you're welcome. And yes, the licensing and IT team have done an incredible job and continue to do so, continuing to work on streamlining processes and, just generally improving the accuracy and speed at which things are done. So that's probably been one of our biggest accomplishments in 2021 for sure. Mm-hmm. Lastly, from the deputy director's perspective, Debbie has headed up all of our efforts related to FBI criminal background checks. And as we were told when we were originally approved to accept criminal background history information, we would be audited. Well, typically they come into your office and do these audits just like, any other auditing entity. Well, with COVID, they haven't done it. And we're almost at the 3-year mark, and they guarantee you that you'll be audited in the first 3 years. So we received our audit, And we submitted it, gosh, probably week and a half early. And so we are waiting for the results of that. And Debbie and Kim and David Gadd and myself have all taken a look at that. And I think, I feel like if it's not perfect, we have done everything in our power to make it as good as we can. And we will learn a lot through the process too, if there's something that we're not doing that we need to be doing. So look forward to those results the next meeting. The next item is our Prometric report, commentary from exam candidates between the months of January and March. Our overall satisfaction rating is 85%, which is still down from where it has been. And my strategy for this, prior to us actually doing much, is we need to find out more specifically what is it that's bothering people. And, is it something about the online application process? Is it that they didn't like that we changed the process in the middle? Is it that is it their frustration that they're having to wait for an exam date? Some things are within our control, some things are not. And so, I'm proposing that we do a little bit of a survey just to those exam takers within the last 6 months and see what it was that really bothered them, and see if we can't craft a survey that provides us with that information versus somebody having to write something out, because the likelihood of people completing something that's going to take them any length of time is not very high. So, and then we can take more action on that. But, we've continued to change processes for the good, but I think change is hard. And especially when you're anxious and you want something quickly and you want it happen right away, and it doesn't do that, there may be a frustration level there, and we just need to understand what the issues really are. Board rules. All right, very importantly, today a vote is required, and what you have in ClickUp are a couple of things. One is it actually looks like the script of for public comments. And then actually, I don't see that now. Anyway, we have the actual submission to the Rules Review Commission, and then the rules that you will be voting on today, voting on approving. All of these relate to our facilitation of these temporary rules to become permanent rules so that we can continue with the alternate approval pathway. So does anybody have any questions about the rules or what we're doing before we ask for a motion? All right, so hearing none, in ClickUp, there is a motion. If you'd like me to read it, I'd be glad to read it. Or if somebody wants to make the motion, they can pull it up and make that motion.
Kathy, go ahead and read the motion, please.
All right. The North Carolina Board of Physical Therapy Examiners moves to adopt the proposed permanent rules cited as 21 NCAC 48D 0107, 0109, 0111, and 21 NCAC 48E 0101. The aforementioned temporary rules are being requested to be made permanent to make the rules consistent with current practice and policy by the North Carolina Board of Physical Therapy Examiners.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to move that we vote on that motion.
Move that we adopt that motion, sure.
Yes.
So moved.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Okay, so Leslie made the motion that we adopt that, move that we adopt that motion, and Pearl seconded. This is regarding the rules changes, editorial changes. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Anyone abstaining? The motion carries.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The next item on the agenda under the rules is a request to consider reinstatement of repealed board rules in section 300 recent graduates. And in your packet, there's a copy of these repealed rules. And what it has to do with is the fact that students, new graduates or recent graduates or people that are waiting to take the exam do not have the ability to practice if they're waiting for an exam date. And in today's world, there are a lot of people that are applying for residencies that they can't access unless they are licensed. A number are very concerned about getting to work, getting, being considered for jobs that are available and starting to work and pay off their student loans. So the letter and the request that we received was from, I believe it was 16 out of the 21 programs in the state to reconsider these rules. And
But I'm trying to, I didn't understand exactly what they were asking for. Are they wanting the students to be able to just work in physical therapy with the PT over them like a preceptor until they take the board? Is that what it is, and get paid for it?
well, if we reinstate the old rules, yes, they want to be able to function like a licensee prior to obtaining their license. Because they have graduated with their entry-level education, but they haven't been able to take the exam because they're waiting for an exam date. And without that exam, let's just assume for a moment that they've completed all the rest of their licensure application requirements. And if all we're waiting for is that final passing of the exam before the board can approve them for licensure, they want to be able to practice with supervision so that they can begin to, find a job, pay off their loans, access a residency, et cetera, et cetera.
Kathy,
One time before, wasn't it like that one time before?
Correct.
Was.
And they
So
were
Kathy-
repealed. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering why was that taken away in the first place? When I graduated, I could work as a graduate PT and someone had to co-sign back in the 80s. So there must have been a reason that they stopped that practice.
Well, since I wasn't working at the board then, I don't know that I can tell you that. I just know that they were repealed in approximately 1989. David Edwards.
I think I remember. It seems that because of the testing was available more readily and not fixed date, that occurred because of that reason. I was in, of the age when the last few that could do provisional licensing, and it meant a great deal to me, not to have to wait, for the exam, and because it was fixed date, whenever I took the exam, and that was before the electronic, exam days. I think we were probably the last ones to do it on paper. So, I personally agree with that request and think it's something worth exploring. because I think
I
it would be
agree.
beneficial.
Okay.
I would
so-
agree with that too.
Okay. So this would be something that would go to our rules committee because it's something that has to be taken to the Rules Review Commission. Part of this, we still are under the ability to do regulatory flexibility. The question is whether it can be considered a temporary, whether it qualifies for a temporary rule, and whether we've really fully explored the possibilities of what the risk to the public of having, non-licensed people practicing. In the letter, I just want to point something out about the letter. Did somebody want to say something? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Do you know if there's any other states that have that provisional license now?
I imagine that there are. I don't know the facts of this. I needed to bring it to the board before we could do
Okay.
research on it.
My thought, Kathy, would be not to use the temporary exemption, but to carry it through the rules process as a permanent rule change and not to rush it, because I know that there will be impacts on processes. There's with retirements and things changing, I think there's probably enough on the plate that, we don't want to rush this.
Well, and I'm concerned as an employer, Medicare is talking about reducing pay for PT assistants treating patients. Some of our payors will not pay if a non-credentialed therapist does the treatment. The liability on a supervising PT on a provisional licensee in practice settings like home health and skilled nursing, are we comfortable letting that provisional licensee work independently? I just see a lot of questions that really need to be revisited before we decide on this issue.
I do recall that I wasn't allowed to do a home health until fully licensed. And I don't remember if that was part of the, Practice Act or regulatory language. But there were some limitations on it. But certainly I think it comes with pros and cons that need to be, explored further.
Right.
Just real quick on the regulatory flexibility part of it. All of the executive orders and the bills that were passed by the General Assembly, what was kind of underlying that was, hey, these licensing boards need to do whatever they can because COVID has created these issues that we need to grant people these, some flexibility on. And if this isn't directly tied to COVID, then I don't know that it meets the purpose for what those statutes and executive orders were passed for.
I know that the FSBPT is still, they are not back to the 5 dates yet. There's still some windows there, and that would be the limitation. But it doesn't, you're right, David, it doesn't change the fact that they are still going to be at 5 days, 5 testing dates, and that's it. And I think the only way for a program to try to address these issues, I think people have tried with the Federation, and so right now that's just not an option to get more test dates. So they're coming to the board, and I do think we have to further explore the issues. One of the things that I think is maybe not quite accurate in the letter that I think the board needs to think about is that it says the emergency actions the board took to enable temporary license during COVID has shown this is possible and bears little risk to the high level of preparation and rigor our North Carolina PT and PTA graduates receive in all their programs. I think they're talking about temporary exemptions from licensure, and that has to do with people that have licenses in another state already. So they're misspeaking here.
I
And,
agree.
and so we can't, I don't think you can take that fully as an argument toward, it's fine and there's no little risk.
I agree. The basis for the temporary licensure was already in our statutes, and it allowed out-of-state PTs who are licensed elsewhere to come in to try to provide help in dealing with whatever caused the state of emergency. So I think I agree with you. I don't think there's a connection there.
So I will, I think if we have a consensus, this can go to the rules subcommittee for further consideration. And we will be able to engage with all of the programs that have requested this to get some additional information.
One final comment I wanted to make, Kathy, is that as an employer hiring PTs, OTs, and speech pathologists, it is not uncommon for me to hire one of these graduates as an aide, and they function as an aide in my clinic. I'm not going to hire a graduate and pay them a PT salary or a PT assistant salary if they cannot function fully as a licensee in my practice.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not missing out on opportunities or jobs with employers like me, but they're not going to get paid as if they were fully licensed. So that's a workaround that we've done for years.
And Teresa, we do that some as well. We don't do it necessarily with speech or OT, because speech is a little different anyway. But like we have got a couple right now that do aid work or tech-like work for about 50% of what they would normally
Right.
paid.
Okay. Thank you.
David, you hire them at way above an aide salary.
Average is somewhere around 16 an hour. So it's about the same we would pay an athletic trainer or somebody like that.
Right.
And see, one thing is they haven't taken the board. So when they do an initial evaluation, they can't sign it as a PT because they're really not a PT until they get their license.
Exactly. And that's why
years, yeah. Because
Right.
years ago we did it, but we hired them as aides because they couldn't do an initial evaluation and sign it as that.
Mhm.
They were an aide to get paid at that salary until they took the boards and got their license.
Right.
When I worked under this rule, we signed as, I don't know if it was graduate PT, but a GPT. And then we didn't have to have a PT with us, but a PT had to come and co-sign the note. I know in the hospital system, they allowed me to work under that. So there's some, and it looks like these people who are wanting to go into residency programs, which are fairly structured anyway, they're the ones who are having problems mainly. I'm sure everyone would take advantage of it if they could do it, but they're missing opportunities.
Yes, the flip side of that is, and Cindy's on mute, but I'll just ask her to nod her head. I remember Cindy talking about having to manage this in a paper world when they used to do this. This is a definite increase in workload for the board office. I'm not saying anything about one way or the other. It's not a reason not to do it or to do it. It's just that it would be a process to really monitor it, especially if we reinstated the rules the way that they were, because if they didn't pass it, then that gets taken away.
Right.
Yeah. So
And do we give them one chance or two chances to pass, or, then the employers, do they have to let them go until they can come back and pass? I mean, it's a big can of worms.
there's a lot to it.
David, Gad, I remember I wasn't on the board then, but I remember afterwards John Silverstein talking about some of the issues related to provisional or temporary license. And one of the things was, if I recall correctly, and this may be totally, I may be recalling incorrectly completely, but there was also the issue about how if somebody had a disciplinary action and they weren't a licensee because they have a provisional license, what it was, how do you work that out? So
How do
there's
you
a
deal
little
with that? And
gray area.
That's right. And is it a violation of the supervising PT's license?
And if I remember correctly, it would fall back on the supervising cosigner.
Always. Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move that to the Rules Committee. I don't have any further update other than we were waiting for this meeting, and we're almost done with this current set of permanent rules, and then we're going to get the Rules Committee back together. So we don't have a date for that yet, but that's going to happen soon. Okay, rules and schools. So now schools are next. We have the pass rates for 2021 through 2018. And I want to say there was only one program that I really could identify as being way below the standard in the 2021 so far, and that would be South Community College. And we have continued to talk to South. I know they're working on having some things implemented to try to update their ultimate pass rate, but also in this particular year, they've only had 6 people take it. So that tends to skew your statistics a little bit. And then looking back at the 2020 cohort, Martin Community was down in their first time pass rate, but in their overall pass rate, they still are above the national average. And then Wingate was a little lower than they have been in a while. So I don't think those scores at this point warrant any further action, but we keep monitoring it. As we always have, there are updated school addresses in ClickUp if you need those for any reason. We've talked about the fact that there's been a significant turnover in program directors, and so we need to continue with our efforts to communicate to them because when you're new and you've never done anything with licensing or students, and our processes are in the middle of changing, it can be confusing. So we make very proactive efforts to communicate to them. The exam dates and score dates are here attached to the agenda for your review and put on your own calendars just to be aware of those and when you might be asked to help assist. We are going to be talking to High Point to do a couple of educational sessions, and then their students are going to get together and we're going to do our second annual licensing, bring all your stuff to work to school day, and we'll help you work through the licensing process. And I'm sure that'll go a little smoother this year than last year. Last year, they didn't have their FSBPT IDs, which we now require. And so it made it a little slower.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some communications with different programs. Anne Marie Prado from Rowan Cabarrus, they received their PTA program accreditation. So they congratulations to them and to her for that accomplishment. And so Debbie's been talking with them about licensing We've communicated with Eileen Coleman with some questions. And then lastly, Emma White is a professor at Winston-Salem State, and she is doing some research on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and asked for our PTMDS data. So this data is very valuable to collect, and I'm excited that we're able to provide it, and she's working through the SHEP Center to obtain what she's looking for. Typical reminders about ethics, ethics training, and SEIs. Everybody got their SEI in on time. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody for doing that in a timely manner. And then keeping up with when your next ethics training is due individually. I think the one I have highlighted on my list here is Crystal is due in October. So have any questions about that, feel free to either look and click up, or you can ask me, or we can provide you with some information about that. And then also attached to this is the Ethics Commission newsletter from March 2021. Always an interesting thing to read. It's yet another educational tool about regulation and requirements for board members in North Carolina. As we always do, we publish the responses to the questions that the board discussed at the prior meeting, and here are the questions regarding administration of oxygen and vaccine administration from the last meeting. Don't have a big update from the PT Compact, except for the fact that we now have 34 jurisdictions in the PT Compact, and that is as many as the Nursing Compact, and they've been around a lot longer. So, that's awesome
Really good.
for licensure portability. It's awesome for patient access. And kind of to support that, I had written a letter way back to someone in Medicaid, and just helping them with information that the board considers a compact holder to have the same rights and privileges of a licensee. And I was notified by someone there that they had approved, Medicaid had approved privileges, or that eligibility for that person with compact privileges to get paid through Medicaid. So, evidence that they are treating it as we believe that it should be treated. So that was great. There's a PT Compact Commission update. Now it's probably even a little dated because it's April and we're at June. But always interesting to see what things are happening. And then there's a couple of advisory opinions here. So just like we have to pay attention to North Carolina state law, the PT Compact has an attorney who has issued some opinions and it's more for states that were having difficulty sharing information. The compact language allows us to share information about investigations. If somebody from our state or someone is a compact holder in our state and their home state wants to know about what investigation information that we have, we are allowed through that regulation to share it. We haven't had to do that so far, but some states balk at that a little bit, and these are some advisory opinions just demonstrating why we're allowed to do that. And then how we need to notify them about licensees that have encumbrances on their licenses.
Kathy, one thing I learned in that training was that was a reason a lot of the states who aren't participating, it had to do with sharing data with the compact. It seemed to be their primary hesitation for some reason.
There are some states that don't think about what the contents of the office as public record in the same way that North Carolina does. So there is a lot of hesitance about that. And, I don't know whether that will ever change, but when legislatures are looking at universal licensure as opposed to compact, it's kind of, in the end, that the data sharing, I think, is even more important if something like that were to happen. You need to know who's in your state working, and maybe that'll change the conversation some. Here is the very long list of reports to the state, updated policies, insurance policies that we have, other reporting that we have to do, information that is sent to our auditor. And then we have responded to this credentialing agency already, and you guys earlier were able to answer the question about whether we can accept these credentials reviews through their portal through an electronic means. So we've answered that question. But this is, again, a lot of the work that the board office is doing, month in between meetings, and to comply with state law. And so we want to talk about, Madam Chair, we want to talk about imaging at about 2 o'clock, because I know someone will be listening about that time. We also would like to get the update from our information technology department on cybersecurity, and then get a website preview. So I don't know if we need a short break and then start with imaging at 2 o'clock, and then circle back around to the IT, because that's about what we have left for the business today.
Right. Well, I have 2 questions. One is, do you want to introduce this whole imaging thing, or is the participant going to be talking about that at 2 o'clock?
Well, the board, well, I know that she is listening and viewing through YouTube. And if the board wanted specifically to ask her questions, they could certainly do so. In ClickUp is attached the documentation that we were provided. And so if you look at the cover letter that came with it, right up front is the request. I'm writing to request that you reconsider the 2006 board rules that allow physical therapists to request radiologic consultations, but prohibit physical therapists from ordering radiologic examinations. And then it goes on, this specific individual that made the request, she's doing it on behalf of the APTA NC chapter of ABTA, but she's a retired Army physical therapist, and describes a little bit of her background, and that how they were able to use it in the military, and then talks a little bit more about imaging. And then one of the things that we discussed earlier was the fact that this may be one of those topics that needs to go to our public protection task force. And so certainly you are welcome to ask her questions, or we can get her to participate today, or we could ask her to do something more fully at a task force meeting, and then out of those discussions, we can bring it back to the board with a recommendation. So it's up to the board whether you would like to have more information now or not.
Okay. Kathy, can you reference where her letter is? I know we all read it yesterday as we were preparing, but for the people
Sure.
listening and in looking at the agenda, can you pinpoint exactly where that is located?
It is located in
It's a scope of practice.
on ClickUp under scope of practice, which is B in the agenda.
B as in boy,
V is in Victor.
Victory.
V as in victory. So I would recommend that if you'd like to review this document, let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 2 p.m.
Right.
Just to further specify, it's the fourth one down.
Thank you, Leslie.
So if you'll just mute your audio and video and come back by 2 o'clock exactly, we'll reconvene.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes,
Hey, so it's like, I was looking on the APTA NC website about the nominations,
yes.
and I can't find it at all. I just tried to call them to ask them where it was at.
Let me see if I can forward an email.
I don't recall getting any kind of notification. That's not to say I can't miss it, but
It is an email that is in the email address that you have on file with the board. So if it's your personal address, email address, let me see if I can't find it in here. And I will forward it to everyone on the board in a moment.
sorry to interrupt your break there.
Yeah, that is not a problem. Here we go. Look at that. And they
Tell you
send
what, when
out-
you have to do these, I don't know how many of these you do the full day Zoom, but I've had to do a couple of CARF accreditation surveys virtually, and they're 2 days, on the camera, back to back, and it is hard. I don't sit still well.
I know. Sometimes you just have to put your camera down and then go do some jumping jacks or something. It is hard. All right, I have now found the nomination, and I will send that out to the board members, Leslie, because
Okay, well, I guess I missed it, but
well, it may, like we say, it may not it may not be going to the email that you normally check.
it might have been in my spam, which I'm not good about checking either, too.
Yeah.
I use my work address. I mean, my New Hanover email for all that.
Mm-hmm. One, two, three, 4, 6, 7. Rosa.
Oh.
Hi.
Where'd I go?
Yeah, so there's a nomination link in the email. So you do have to have that email.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Can anyone tell me whether PTs do a diabetic foot exam?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm getting a question, are PTAs allowed to perform a diabetic foot exam as long as a PT or RN determines if the referral or more testing is needed? And I don't know enough about objective measurable tests that go into diabetic foot exams to know if a PTA could be involved in that or not.
Now, your question is what now? Whether PTA can do it?
A physical therapist assistant, yes.
But it wouldn't that, if the PT does it, so can a PTA do it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's this emailed question that I've gotten this afternoon.
Wouldn't that be an assessment?
Well, it would be, and what I'm saying is, PTAs can perform portions of data collection, objective measurements.
I mean, like
I-
a bird test.
Pardon me?
I said like a bird test. Like
Yeah, or like a manual muscle test.
yeah.
Right. So my question is, how much of a diabetic foot exam is objective measurements?
Well, your word is exam. Are they collecting information because they did a treatment, and in the treatment, like you got a total knee, and so I did measurements for the knee in my exam after I did the treatment to see if they increased range of motion, or are you saying at the knee and examining the knee and doing all this and then writing it up as an examination?
Well, okay, so my question is not whether a PTA can do an exam, because the answer is no. I know that. The question is, what components are objective measurable information that a PTA could perform?
Oh, okay.
Diabetic foot exam.
I think they
Okay.
could perform the sensory assessment if, as long as they have the right tools and it was part of the therapist's, treatment plan.
Treatment is, if it's in the treatment plan, then I can see whatever being done.
I mean, they would check sensation, they would check the skin condition.
Yeah,
Those are objective things.
yeah. If it's warm to touch, if it's swelling, pain,
Coloration.
tolerate, yeah.
Thank you. Helpful.
Okay, to be timely, everyone, it is 2:00 in the afternoon, so our break is now officially over. I would ask you to open up your mics and turn on your videos, and we will go back to our open session. Kathy?
Okay.
Scope of practice question on imaging.
Yes, so everybody has had an opportunity to take a look at the request from APTA-NC. And the question is, does anyone want to have further discussion about this now? Do you have any questions for Mary Kay Hanna? Or is this something that you are ready to have the Public Protection Task Force take a look at, and then go from there with requesting more information and having discussion?
Mary Kay says she has a short presentation. Can we go ahead and see that?
I need to text her and she can come talk to us live.
Oh, okay.
So you need to give me just a few minutes. Oh, you're just calling me. Hello.
Oops.
There's a noise out there that sounds like a card sorter. Is somebody sorting cards?
Little side game of poker going on.
David Knoll. I don't know if you can hear me, but I am having difficulty copying the link to the afternoon Zoom so that Mary Kay can participate. So I need a little difficulty.
If you
Or
can
need a little
provide me
help.
with the email address, I can send out that information.
All right, thanks. I'll send it to you here in a minute.
Awesome, thank you. I've got it over here. I'm about to send that email out now. Okay, and that email has been sent. Give it just a few moments, but it has the link for the afternoon segment, which we're all in attendance at right now, along with the meeting ID and passcode.
All righty. I think she should be getting on here in a moment. I don't think you all heard me before because I was on mute. I don't think Mary Kay has her presentation ready for today because I told her that I thought the board would refer this to the task force. she is more than glad to discuss it. However, she spent a lot of time preparing this report, and I feel like is more than capable of talking about it right now, even off the cuff.
Yeah.
I've just admitted her.
Okay, great. You did it. Thank you, Mary Kay.
Hey, everybody.
Joining us.
Hello.
Has her presentation ready for today because I told her that I thought the board would
Uh-oh.
huge delay.
Oh,
She is more than glad to discuss it, however.
Yeah, you'll just have to mute that YouTube stream, whoever has that up.
oh, I did. I had it up. I had it up.
Even off the cuff.
Okay, I had the YouTube stream up. Now it's off. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Mary Kay. I was just apologizing to the board because I had told you that I thought that they would just refer it to a committee, but I also said you are more than capable
Yeah.
of talking off the cuff about this topic. So I
Yeah,
apologize.
I'll be, you guys who know me know that I cannot be brief. So no, I'm kidding. I'll be super brief. And then if you have a committee that wants to actually sort through everything, I'll be happy to make a presentation and talk you through it. As you can see, you know, I have my request, and then I have about a 5-page paper with all the citations. And then I have a 3-page executive summary. And so, and in the presentation, there's a link to all of the documentation, the evidence that backs up all the points that I have made.
Okay, Mary Kay, let me interrupt you just for a moment. I'd like to welcome you to our board meeting and thank you for your interest in presenting to the board today. I'd also like to officially introduce you to your board in person, so to speak, and then turn it over to you for a brief bio of who you are and how you came to be here today. I am the chairman of this board, Teresa Hale. David Gadd, where are you? Okay, and the rest of you, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
David Edwards. I don't think you know me, Mary Kay, but it's good to meet you.
Needs no introduction.
Crystal Ostland.
Needs
I
no
don't think I've
introduction.
ever had a conversation with you.
No, yeah.
I'm Pearl Rome.
Hi, Burl.
Hi.
Leslie Kessler.
I've met you before, ma'am. How are you?
I'm Jamie Miner. I've met you also, Jamie.
Hi.
Hi.
Paul Garcia, physician member.
Hi, Dr. Garcia.
And then
Rosa,
you
you
know
may
the
want to go again. Rosa, go again. I don't think she heard you.
Rosa Gonzalez.
And Rosa is our public member. And then you know Kathy Arney and Cindy Kiley, our staff.
Thank you. My one daughter's name is Rosa, and it is my favorite name. Thank you very much. So thank you for having me. And it's the long time that I've been a PT for 20 years, this month. And I graduated in 2001. I'm not going to tell you that whole 20-year story, but I will tell you that in the Army, you don't have to have a license from the state that you practice in, as long as you have a state from. So my classmates back in the day looked up all 50 states to find out which was the cheapest and easiest. And so they recommended North Carolina was the cheapest and easiest 20 years ago. And that's why I got a license in North Carolina with no expectation that I would end up living here and retiring here. So the updates to the North Carolina continuing competence and I had no idea what a great state it is to live in terms of having a board that's responsible to keep citizens safe from PT licensees on its own board. And it's been a great state to retire in. And I started off with that license and then ended up here. After I retired from the Army, I had a fee-for-service practice, and I started working with the Commission on Accreditation. And once I saw the inside of a faculty, I thought that's where I need to be, is teaching, because I love PT so much. I can't just my passion goes beyond, and with every single patient I see, I wanted to spread it out. And so I started adjuncting, and lo and behold, now I am an assistant professor at Elon University, DPT. And along the way, people like David and Crystal hooked me into some small projects for the APTA North Carolina. And slowly but surely, I ended up the president of that, sort of accidentally, I feel like, and now I'm the president of the APTA North Carolina, and I'm trying to herd the cats of lots of people's different cool projects towards our goal, our mission and goal of, promoting, protecting, and progressing physical therapy for the benefit of patients. And that, of course, is a different goal than the goal of the board, and I know that, and I think we work very nicely, not together, but side by side, to ensure efficacy, safety, and all of those things for citizens and patients of North Carolina. So the issue of imaging, whether imaging is in the scope of practice of physical therapy, I think it's very clear that it is well within the professional scope of practice of physical therapy, at least in 2021. And you'll see in the, so then the question is that it's not in our jurisdictional scope of practice, not because it's in the Practice Act, but because it's in the rules. Now, it was never in the rules from 1951, when we first had a license, until 2006. Now, presumably, maybe nobody asked about it, but suffice to say, it showed up in 2006, and I could find no one, to include Ben Massey, to tell me why the restriction was put into place in the rules. So my contention is that certainly, at least in the last 15 years since 2006, that the ordering of imaging, which is sort of synonymous with referring for imaging, requesting imaging directly to a radiologist or a radiology center, is well within the physical therapy professional scope of practice, and most people's personal scope of practice. But like everything, every single thing isn't within each PT's personal scope of practice. But it's now, because of the rules in North Carolina, not in the jurisdictional scope of practice. So one of the things I've done in the paper is kind of give a background about why it's important for PTs to be able to do it in a direct access capacity, which we have had since 1985. So for instance, chiropractors can order imaging and there's no big deals about it. Physical therapists in the military have ordered imaging since 1972 in the VA service, in the public health service. There are now 3 states that have added it to their Practice Act language. There's another 5 or 6 states whose boards have interpreted the rules for it to be okay for PTs to do it. Then there's another couple of private big health systems like WakeMed, not WakeMed, but systems that are big like that, or UNC or something, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and California that have employed PTs to be able to do that. And really what it does is cut out the middleman, because right now PTs still sometimes need imaging information. And what they do is they call back to a physician, explain what's needed and why, and then the physician orders it. Or they send the patient back to a separate appointment with an information to the physician about ordering it. And PTs are very well trained for that. So essentially what it does is, when PTs need that information, they get it, but in a delayed way that adds cost and extra appointment and time. So the person's treatment, whether it's back to PT because there's no big problem, or whether it's on to the next provider who because there is a problem that showed up in imaging, then their intervention gets started without that extra delay. And so in the introduction to the paper, I described some different scenarios where that would be where a PT's duty, according to our Practice Act, is to determine, our first clinical reasoning duty is to determine if a patient is within our scope of practice or not. Now, what would not be in a scope of practice is something that's emergent, that's musculoskeletal, or something that's non-musculoskeletal. And so we have tests to be able to try to sort that out between the history and the tests and measures, but imaging is one of those tests. And so there's some that would need to go somewhere else. And so an example of when I was in the Army, I do a shoulder exam for a woman. And usually I have people point to begin with to give me some idea as they're taking the history. And finally I said to this woman, could you point to where you're, because the history wasn't making sense. And she pointed like this. Okay, well, I ordered an image and then I was able to send her on, she had breast cancer. And so of course I contacted her primary care manager, but it saved something that she didn't have to go back and see him and then get an appointment. And then I also was able to refer to oncology. But then there are other like smaller issues that a PT needs to know. Like, so for instance, a stress fracture in the lower leg, in the tibia, most of the time there's tests that can determine whether if someone has soft tissue problem in the like shin splints or whether they have a stress reaction or a stress fracture, but sometimes you can't tell. And the treatment depends on whether it is or isn't, in which case you would need an image. And I'm the one who is trained how to do that. It would just be a lot faster and easier to send them and have them come back. So, so that's the idea. And it's done in other countries and it's done in other states and it's done all across the military and it's done in some hospital systems. And so the question of whether it's within the professional scope of practice is that it's in the basic education. So all 10 PT schools in North Carolina do have imaging classes. And I actually got together with all of them to make sure that it wasn't just me thinking that we were teaching at my school the right stuff, but in fact, everybody has agreed on a list of objectives that they teach that comes from the Orthopedic Academy of Orthopedic PT, which is a special interest group of the APTA, or an academy, and then they have an imaging special interest group under that. There's an imaging educational manual that has that these are the things that are recommended. And I have personally talked with all 10 schools, the people who teach imaging, and so all of those things are linked in the paper. So you can click a link when I mention the educational packet, you can go see the education. You click a link, you can see the objectives. The other objectives that are required in Commission on Accreditation is, like I said, finding out whether someone belongs in PT or not. The other thing that's in our Practice Act is that it requires that if something is beyond the scope of physical therapy, that we refer them to a medical doctor, a patient to a medical doctor. So I ask you, is referring someone to a radiologist too much different than referring them to another medical doctor? There's some things like that. So it's definitely in the education. There's also tons of continuing education. In fact, one of my friends who worked with me as a volunteer on this regulatory paper project, who teaches at High Point, is actually an instructor at High Point on imaging, but he also teaches continuing education. And I've provided 10 at least different links to you about continuing education. So then the third question of whether ordering imaging or referring directly to an imaging center is common in practice, I would say that it's not common in practice in North Carolina because of the blunt language against it in the rules. Having said that, the same friend of mine is a big time researcher and has done survey research that I have put the details into the paper from him that show that PTs in North Carolina have the skills to do it. And so, so again, there's the Army, the military, the VA, the US Public Health Service, there's the 8 states that already do it and the other, and so then the question is it safe and efficacious? And so I have listed on there all the different, there's so much research evidence showing the safety and efficacy of PTs requesting imaging directly. So for instance, you'll see that there are several studies that are a 2-year study and a 5-year study, and they review every single order that a PT makes because there's this fear of overutilization. And so I can assure you that that's never been the problem in the military. But in fact, the utilization is about 12% of all patients to a PT received an order for some kind of imaging, and 39.5% of all patients to primary care received an order for imaging. Now, the typical numbers to a plain primary care is that 50% are musculoskeletal and 50% are non-muscular. So 50% are hurt and 50% are sick. So, you know, they're sort of apples and oranges. But on the other hand, PTs have direct access because we are the experts in a neuromusculoskeletal evaluation exam. And there's a study that you'll see by an retired Army Colonel, Joe Moore, when he was at West Point, where they had PTs and orthopods and primary care people who weren't orthopedic trained specialists to give a diagnosis before an MRI. And the PTs were not only just as good as the orthopods, which is what is reported in the paper, but I was there when they were doing the study. They were slightly better than the orthopods, but of course that statistically they were the same. So that's what we said, we're the same in terms of being able to make a neuromusculoskeletal diagnosis that is then confirmed on imaging. So there's any number of papers that I have cited that show its safety and the efficacy and the places have done before. So there's a long paper from the Imaging Special Interest Group that's about 5 years old now that can lay out the same things for you. And so I've laid out all the reason to begin with, why it's in our professional scope of practice, the background of why we would use it and how it would be needed. Then the second part, I lay out all of the basic education, so you can be sure that PTs understand that. And then I laid out the continuing education. And lastly, the piece on if it's common in practice, I suggest it would be common in practice, were it be allowed. And then the question is whether it would be safe and efficacious. Would any and you can see the plain literature outcomes are that there have been literally no adverse events in places like of something missed or something like that. Or anyway, there have been no adverse events from when PTs have the jurisdiction to call for direct imaging. And I have all of those papers for you to review. So then the last thing in the paper that I wrote, I called frequently asked questions. And those are sort of contextual items like, well, will insurance pay for it? And how does it actually work in person? And what happens if someone has something bad on what happens when the cancer shows up on the image? And so I've answered those questions as well, but I also want to point out that those questions aren't the purview necessarily of the board. The board question is whether it's in our scope of practice. The other things are, between us and insurance companies. But that said, I tried to answer them all so that everyone can say, like, how in the heck would this work? So for instance, in the places where PTs order imaging, insurance pays for it just fine. What happens if there's a PT who doesn't feel comfortable doing that because, I don't know, they didn't come up through the Army like I did? Well, they don't have to use it. They just do the same thing that they always do and get their imaging the roundabout way. And I would suggest that that's the same for every type of evaluative or treatment across the board, that professionals only do what's in their personal scope of practice, and you don't have to limit them to that. So for instance, physicians are allowed to do everything under the sun, but if you're not a surgeon and there's no emergency, a physician is not going to cut into you. The same, so for instance, EMGs and nerve conduction studies have for 50 years been within the jurisdictional scope of practice of PTs in North Carolina. Yet I'm not trained in that, but I also am not going to do it because I'm not trained in it. So same with, like, say, dry needling or something that might take advanced training. So I would suggest that, if you were to change the rule, that there would be no fear of some PT who didn't know how to do that, of them doing it. Only the people who would know how to do that would do it. And if they wanted to learn, they could take plenty of education available to fill in any gaps someone might have. But for the most part, that people do have that direct access understanding. So that's the outline of the paper that I've written, and all of the, and I'd be happy to make a full out presentation and take you through every one of the details of the evidence at another time if you'd like. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for listening to me.
Mary Kay, thank you for your willingness today to come before the board and share this information. We have the paper and the links, and we've all taken the time to review that. Are there any questions from board members to Mary Kay? I have one. So my question, Mary Kay, is physical therapists are not allowed to order or prescribe medications. In the event that a PT feels that contrast dye is needed in a CT or MRI, we would not be allowed to order that kind of imaging. Is that correct?
Wow, that's a good question. That's one I didn't see coming. I thought I had everything covered, darn it.
Gotcha.
There you got me, right out of the starting gate. I mean, that would be a detail that would have to be looked into. I mean, it's rare that I have I don't have a full patient load these days, right? I see patients with our sports resident and in our, so I see a couple patients a week. So, but it doesn't really matter if it's rare. When an MRA is needed, then it's needed. And so I had never considered the dye an order of medication before. So that would be a detail that I would have to research for you.
Also, in the case of a child, certain imaging, particularly a CT, if, for example, I've been a PT for 40 years, and I had a pediatrician that sent a child to our clinic who just had an awkward gait. That was the diagnosis. And I took one look at the child and noticed this is not an awkward gait.
Yeah.
This is actually a hemiparesis, a very mild, but it's hemiparesis. It looks like a brain tumor. So, I'm going back to the pediatrician saying, I'm not comfortable evaluating this child other than to tell you that this is a brain issue and he needs imaging.
So that's a great example. And what I would say is that if PTs have the privilege or of ordering imaging directly, that PTs would do exactly what you would do. There's a whole bunch of PT that wouldn't, and I answer this in some of the frequently asked questions. There's a whole bunch of PTs who ordinarily have no cause or reason to order imaging. They don't have a cause to, and those are most often pediatrics and neurologic, inpatient, acute care. I mean, if you're working in those regions, you're working very closely with a multidisciplinary intraprofessional team, in which case the physician is the team lead and you would do exactly what that person did.
So in that specific scenario, that child was only 2 years old. So you're talking about a sedated.
No, I know that. So there's no way I would have done exactly the same thing you did. So I'll give you an example of in the Army when I had that privilege. A PT assistant came to get me and said that they were treating a patient who had been evaluated by another PT who was out that day. And the patient said essentially that their stocking feet numbness wasn't changing with their back exercises. So the person had, from classic stocked feet, a 19-year-old young man. So I came out, I quickly took a history, and then I started a lower motor neuron screen of a lower quarter neuro screen. And when I got to his, patella reflex, instead of kicking out, his knee came all the way up like this, like all the way up over his head like this. It was a huge upper motor neuron sign. So I knew this guy has got MS, or ruling out some kind of idiopathic, brain plaques. So what did I do? I didn't order, like the imaging that I'm normally ordering are the neuromusculoskeletal ones that I described to you. So I went next door, I got the PM&R doc, I had him come in, I had him do the same thing I did. And I said, and he looked at me and said, order a brain MRI. And I said, hey doc, I haven't ordered a brain MRI. I mean, I'm allowed to, but that's just not normal. That's not my outpatient purview usually. And I said, shall I write X, Y, and Z? And he said, yes. And so then I added his name on it so that we both got and then I walked the kid up to the neuro office and got him on an evaluation with a neurologist. So what I would say is that there are lots of situations, peds, neuro, acute care, SNF, home health, the kind of where it's likely to be inappropriate for a PT to order imaging. And what I would say is a PT who knows what they're doing knows when it's inappropriate and knows when to consult with their multidisciplinary team and who's in charge of that team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. So for
Yes,
folks that are direct, you have folks that are direct access who don't have a primary care doc. My concern would be that if you have the ability to order, you got to own the result, because that to me is critical. Because if you just order the test, it's on a Friday. Sometimes most we're talking about maybe a non-musculoskeletal issue shows up, and this patient doesn't have we might think that primary care providers are dime a dozen, but they really aren't.
I know. Yeah.
So do you own it? I would hope that the person would own that, because again, until that, I can give you a scenario where you do a chest x-ray and they show a mild pneumothorax. The radiologist, depending on how big it is, or they may document on it that it's a low probability, but then it's not followed up. And then if the person doesn't have a primary care provider, that can turn into a collapsed lung. So that would be it's just that you've got to own it. Whether you're ordering
yes, sir, I think.
No, I was just saying, whether you're ordering labs or whether you're ordering imaging, that's the big, whoever, whether it's a PA or a nurse, they've got to own the result, not to just pass it on to because the provider may not be around. So that would be my concern.
Well, thank you for the question, sir. So Dr. Garcia, you're exactly right. And so I would suggest that right now, even without that tool, PTs do own what they find out and do make sure a patient gets to the right place ASAP when there's a problem. And so the same thing, I've seen people, as a direct access provider, fee for service. And so a lot of people do come to see me in the past without, often they don't have a primary care provider. And so but if I can manage it, it's fine. But if I can't manage something, then I get them right away and tell them, if I had a suspected pneumothorax, I would drive them to the ED myself. That's what should happen. And so right now, PTs are already, so the question is, what happens when something shows up on there that needs to be taken care of? So that's true no matter what kind of test you do. I took care of a young person who ended up having a college-age person who had, I think it's a weird name, but sign of the buttock. Basically, it was sepsis in the gluteal muscles, sacroiliitis and turned into osteomyelitis. I didn't, and the person had no physician. I said, this is dangerous. The pain you have is, and the signs that you have, it's either this or this, could be very, very dangerous. And I I made sure that they went to the emergency department. But most of the people that I have, it's true that some don't have a primary care, but in those cases, I even now without imaging, I am communicating instantly with the physicians.
Okay, well, Mary Kay, once again, thank you for coming today and presenting this. We have an awful lot to consider. We do have a task force that has been established that will address your question and challenge. And that will be probably one of the first things they deal with. So thank you so much for presenting today and for sharing all of this information. And we will stay in touch. So,
thank you, ma'am, and I'll make myself available to that task force. And also, Dr. Garcia or anyone else on that task force, if you'd like to speak to some of the other states or hospitals who have employed those to see how it's worked, but also some of those papers describe how it's worked, but you're welcome to talk to people in person as well. And you know, not just take my point of view.
Right.
So we
will definitely thoroughly investigate it for sure.
Thank you for your.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Mary Kay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I think Mary Kay's off the call. That was a lot of good information and a lot to consider. I'm sure there are other licensees out there who share her same questions and opinions, and I challenge the task force to address this as one of their first duties.
It is interesting to wonder why that it used to be, I'll say allowed, or it's not specified, and then it was introduced in there. I just can't remember what the history of it was.
Did it have something to do with the radiologist saying something? I'm trying to recall myself.
I'm thinking it was some kind of political deal to get the support to move it forward, and that was a concession to get direct access or something else in the Practice Act, but I just can't recall.
I just don't remember ever having any privileges about imaging. And I was very much a part of getting direct access with Ben back in the fights of 82, 83, 84. So, you know, and I think the DPT programs probably are teaching much more thorough concepts on when imaging and what imaging is appropriate.
So what she's talking about is in the rules. And so likely this went before the Rules Review Commission. And so if there was objection by someone at the Rules Review Commission or another group, you know, such as radiologists or whatever, you know, that's where this particular thing that she's asking about, you know, probably ran into its rewording or wording at all, because previously it was silent. So.
Okay. Yeah. All right, let's get back on our agenda.
And we will take this to the task force.
Yes. Okay, Kathy.
Okay, I think we've covered everything else up to this point, with the exception of we need to backtrack just a little bit to have a presentation from Greg and Zulika about the website, and to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. So I need just a few minutes to get them onto the meeting and available to talk to you. So if you can hold on just a few minutes, I appreciate that.
While we're waiting, if you need to go grab a soda or afternoon snack, feel free to jump up and do that. That's what I'm doing.
Kathy, I sent Greg and Zuleika the information for the meeting a little bit earlier, and I just messaged them on Discord to join when they can.
Patty, you're on mute. Okay. I did not know this, but David Knoll was receiving some comments coming in from the YouTube regarding the x-rays, or not x-rays, but imaging. And I've captured those, and we'll take those to the task force as well. And Greg should be joining us. Greg and Zuleika should be joining us here in a moment, and we will turn the floor over to them when they're ready.
I'm here.
Hi, good afternoon, guys.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. Good, thank you.
Great. You guys have a preferred order to go in? Website first, or discussing about cyber issues?
You know, if it's okay, I'll go first.
Sure.
And, and save the best for the last, right? Zuleika?
Yeah,
Save
definitely.
the best for last. So, hi, everybody. How are you?
Great. Good to see you, Greg.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. So let me get my document open here. So there's lots and lots going on with in the IT world these days. It's been all over the news with the ransomware, that sort of a thing, and that's sort of thrown a wrench into things, obviously, and then we had all the other things that we were working on at the same time going on, and we are trying to keep charging ahead with those, while also integrating changes and working on coming up with timelines and all kinds of things.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah.
Greg, can you turn on your video? We can't see you.
Really?
Nope.
What now?
You were there at first, and then you disappeared.
Oh, there we go. Is that better?
There you are. Okay.
I must have clicked that. So, you still see me?
Yeah, we do.
We see you now.
Okay, good. So yes, Colonial Pipeline happened, and then I believe it's JWB Meatpacking or something like that, something like that. And so we have been paying attention. The headline, there was headlines all over the news yesterday about it, and the day before that, I don't know about today. But ransomware is the big thing that we're talking about there. Just to give you just 10 minutes on this, ransomware, it looks like it's here to stay. It looks like largely it's replaced existing types of viruses. Those things are still there, but this is actually, I think, integrating itself into the ransomware ecostructure. I would say the risk to any IT organization right now is at least in the area of moderate. That's based on information that I've been reading on white papers and from government publications. It's mostly passive, meaning that they distribute things out via email. They post something out on the website, put a link there, something like that, somebody clicks on it. But increasingly, it's also intrusive, as was the case with Colonial. As it turns out, the information that they originally posted out in May about Colonial was that it was distributed via an email, but as of yesterday or the day before, they published that it was through a VPN connection, an old VPN connection that had a good password, but it was not protected with multi-factor, authorization, that sort of a thing. So they were basically actively hit. There's scant information still out about the meatpacking company, but I've been looking for that too. So obviously we want to respond to the actual active threats at the same time that we're going after the more passive email threats. Part of this is through education. Part of it is by beefing up our infrastructure. Part of it is by working at making our infrastructure stronger, decommissioning some things that are either unneeded or that represent a risk. In terms of the infrastructure, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all those companies they're ramping up, but I think that they are behind this threat a little bit, meaning that they're trying to catch up. The Microsoft's antivirus is very good, but their security model is, compared to Unix, Linux, that sort of a thing, is pretty clunky, and it can be fairly inflexible. Cloud-based systems are available and useful, but they can be risky. So they take a certain amount of education in terms of what we can do with those things. For example, if we back up our stuff to the cloud and the ransomware has access to the backup, they could encrypt that too. So we have to even consider using those wisely. We have our own servers right now. The human factor is, I've been studying this more and more, but the obviously uncontrolled thing, the thing that's more difficult to control, is the human factor. Somebody gets an email that looks like it's from somebody that you know. They click on a link or they click on an attachment, and that attachment contains a virus, and then it spreads out through the organization. And the way the Colonial one worked is they got the software inside, and then the software actively boosted its own permissions to the point where it could spread all the way throughout the company. So they're exploiting some pretty decent technology when they're doing that. Again, it's back to Microsoft. If their APIs allow software to boost its own stuff, boost its own permissions, then it's difficult to protect against that sort of a thing for anybody. So on our part, what we're doing is, we do have antivirus on all the machines. We are reviewing our options there to see if there's more that we could do. For example, multi-layer antivirus, that sort of a thing. We're reviewing our firewalls to make sure that our ports are closed, that sort of a thing. We're upgrading our operating systems. That's all. That was already in the works even before this hit. We're working on enhancing our VPN. Weirdly, I found out that how the virus got in yesterday at like 4:15. After I just finished working, I went over and clicked on the Washington Post, and the article there explained fairly much what happened, which was that the attackers got in through VPN. David and I had a couple of hours earlier been trading information back and forth about some enhancements to our own VPN that would have addressed it. We still have to do those things, but they're on the table, and we hope to get those done sometime real soon. We're also reviewing everybody's permissions. So it's a fairly common thing for a company to, their permissions to, sort of get stale over time, or the permissions get higher than they need to be, so we'll add somebody's permission to do this or add somebody's permission to do that and not re-review it. We're going back through everybody's permissions and giving them as much permission as they need and no more. And that way we can potentially slow the virus before it gets to something that we need as critical infrastructure. For even IT, we're reducing the use of what we call the administrator account, which has really global reach. Someone can, do practically anything with the administrator account. We're going to reduce our use of it. And, again, it's another risk factor that we can reduce. To the extent possible, we're going to enable two-factor authentication for all remote access. That's going to take some work because even some of the things that I was researching and doing, there's a lot of information out on the web. My thinking was, okay, we can do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I was going down the line and I was saying, well, okay, so what if we wanted to do this? And I go to the research point, like for example, using Google multi-factor authentication. There are articles out there saying do not use that. So even Google stuff, which isn't that old, is got its problems, and they pointed it out in the articles what they were. So everything is moving very quickly. Flaws are being found even in what you would otherwise consider good practices. So for example, multi-factor authentication isn't by itself, while it's a great idea and it's good, it has its flaws in some circumstances. So when we do this, we have to do it right.
So do you have a recommendation, Greg? I'm hearing all the research and the fear that is publicized out there. What can you do to protect our data?
Yeah, again.
And Greg, can you pull your camera down? Because I can see your ceiling with lots of pretty lights, but I can't see your mouth. There you go. There you go.
I'm sorry. I've got my screen where I can read it rather than where you can see me. Yes. We're doing, we're doing lots of things. We have daily, and David and I are talking about this practically daily, and it takes up half of our team meeting every week. Part of it, like I said, is on prevention. We are changing, or we are adjusting permissions to keep people from, if they do get the virus, from infecting the entire organization. So if we can limit the amount of damage that would be done to one machine, that sort of a thing. 2, we're upgrading antiviruses, or we're making sure our antivirus is already there and it's already very good, but we're reviewing those things, seeing if there's more antivirus kinds of software that we can add to the machines. We're going to try to, like I said, the method that the person used, since most of our people work off-site, they're all using VPN. So say, for example, somebody was logged into their computer off-site, but they were not logged in on VPN, they probably almost certainly couldn't do any damage to our systems. They would damage their own laptop. But really, honestly, that's, of all the things to fix, it's the easiest thing to fix. So we're working on, number one, protecting out on the edge, which is everybody's PCs, and then inside, we're reviewing all of the ways they might be able to get in from the outside into our servers directly. Like, for example, we're decommissioning or something called FTP, if you don't know what that is. We have used it to transfer files to our website, for example, for years. And now we're switching to a new method that would decommission that. And that by itself would make it harder for the software to get in. Anything is on the table, though. So it's a matter of, number one, protecting the systems by making sure that we've got good antivirus. We're increasing the size of our logins. So I think our current standard is 12 characters. We're going up to 15 based on statistics. It would take many more years for someone to break into a password that has 15 letters. Mm-hmm. We're looking at anything that will protect us, because our feeling is it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to probably continue to grow at a fairly rapid rate. So we're trying to respond accordingly. So decommissioning software that is a risk, increasing protection on individual laptops if we can by increasing antivirus, using biometrics, all of the laptops you guys have, except for I think one has the ability to use a fingerprint to log in with. So David has been working on that. We've got one machine working right now, and it's a test case. So and then so that covers the protections of the systems, and then limiting people's permissions to where if they did get the virus, they would not be able to infect the rest of the environment. So basically going through all of the, find out anybody who has higher permissions that they need to have, and then reducing it down. So by reducing their permissions, then when the software tries to infect, say, for example, a shared directory, they might not be able to infect it. But really, I think the last thing is, well, and then we've got, I mean, this is something, let me put it this way. This is something that we've thought about for a long time. I think, I don't know when the last time ransomware hit, but Kathy and I and David were talking about it last time it hit. And we have been sort of working on this ongoing plan for the longest time. David and I have been working on backups for, well, since he started. We right now have 3 levels of backups for the case, say we did get severely hit. We're working on solidifying those backups, changing them where needed, because those would be our recovery plan. Our database, which is our bread and butter, is backed up every day. We do disaster recovery plans, and in fact, I did another one yesterday after reading some article. I said, oh crap. So I went over and we have 6 months of backups of the database that are currently available. So if something really severe happened, we would be able to recover it back to a machine, a server somewhere. And yeah, so like I said, everything is on the table. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's a thorough explanation. And then we discussed earlier in our meeting today about the SOE. If the governor changes that or allows the workforce to return to the office, then that's a different or an additional protection needed there.
True. In some ways, it's lower risk.
Oh.
Because well, in some ways it is. Because we'd have fewer people on VPN. And since VPN was in the news yesterday as the method that they used.
Ah.
Yeah, so, but on the other hand, it heightens the human factor one, where somebody clicks on an email. So, I wish I could say I had all the answers. We, like I said, we have conversations about it daily. While you guys were actually meeting, David and I were having a conversation. I was trying not to bother him too much, but we were talking about the VPN thing and doing an upgrade to the VPN system. Like I said, everything is pretty much on the table. I'm expecting to see, probably regulations come down, some from the federal level, certainly from the state level on things like this. So we'll be ready and hopefully ahead of the ball on those things. We're looking at a product called Duo, which is a 2-factor authentication thing for VPN, and it's made by Cisco. So we're looking at that as a possible solution also to protect our systems.
Well, I think we all feel a lot more protected and safe with you and David on the job looking at this stuff. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and we are getting answers. The government is providing white papers. Industry is providing white papers. There are best practices coming out. and they're being refined. It's all happening fairly fast. I don't know. I didn't, I only wanted to spend 10 minutes talking about that. All I can say is that it's not going to go away. We're going to have to keep dealing with it. But we've been working on disaster recovery, and we actually we've done a few disaster recovery scenarios since David's worked here. I think we did one specifically for disaster recovery, just in case. What if we lost a server? How long would it take us to get it back up and running? And we actually did that scenario a little over a year ago, I think it was. And we've actually done 2 more within the last 2 months, I believe. So we do, a lot of companies say they do disaster recovery. We try to live it, and David has spent a fair amount of his time working on those things.
Great.
So yeah, thanks to David for that.
Okay, well, thank you for your report.
Okay, and so I'm going to pass it over to Zuleika so that she can show you probably one of the most exciting things that we're doing in IT right now.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so hi guys. I'm really excited to share our progress so far on the redesign. So it's not just the look and feel that we have upgraded or we are upgrading. What we have done or we are doing is also simplifying the entire process, the development process, and also the structure and the tools that we have been using so that the entire process of development also becomes better and more optimized, and performance, etc., increases. So here goes. I'm going to share my screen. My screen there. Okay. So this, I'm going to start with the home page. This is our new home page. Let me minimize my screen here. Okay. So this is our new home page that we have defined, and thanks to Kimberly, Debbie, and all the other team members to come up with ideas and a lot of content improvisation and all that stuff. So feedback and everything, I appreciate that a lot. So so this is our home page with new menus, and we are still working on some of these pages. Not everything is done at this point. We are there like around 80% there, and we are still working on some other new pages. And also refining some of these styles and looks. So this is not the final version, but definitely a very refined version that we have, like a draft version, I would say. So, and some of the images that you would see are not all of them are currently the right ones because we haven't bought them yet. Some of them might have some watermarks until it's decided by the entire team. That's the final. So those are things that you would see. That's I want to bring that up now. So the whole concept of the redesign has been about targeting the users into various groups of audiences that we want to work with. So so that users, the main idea is that the user don't have to spend a lot of time trying to find what they want to do on the website, and it's more clear, more hand-holding is given so that they can do what they want to do in the shortest amount of time possible, and they're satisfied at the end of the day. So with that in mind, what we have done is created the concept of landing pages. From the main homepage, there will be mini landing pages where each of these target audience groups would go into and then find what they want to do. And well, they can always find stuff under the menus if they need to, but there is going to be a workflow or a flow of paths to go for them. So there we have 3 pillars here. These are the 3 main landing pages, one for the board, one for the applications, and one for the licensees. So anybody looking for some information is going to go into the board information just to know about the board and all the other static information that we have. People who want to apply are going to go into the applicant group, and people who have already applied and got the license will go here for any other service that needs to be done. So that's the basic organization that's happened. And then we have all the other information and the hot areas where hot areas, I mean, are places that most visited or the services that are most opted for on the website presented on the homepage, links to lots of content and stuff like that. So obviously we have used the latest technologies to be up to date as well, as much as possible. And we have developed all this. So some of the pages I want to show are like some static pages, some of the online services pages, and some new styles and looks that we have built. So obviously homepage is one of the main page. So this is going to be our maintenance page, and some of the other static pages are going to look somewhat like this. I'm sorry, this is, let's see, okay. Oh God. Okay, there is a directory page and all of this. So these are some pages, and what I would like to show are some of the landing pages. So we have the applicant landing page. This is where the applicants are going to find information about what kind of applications they have to apply for, where they belong, and what documents they are going to need, and all that stuff. So this is the application landing page. The licensee page, where if they need all the licensee information, jurisprudence, continuing competence, all of that stuff, they can find from here. There is board information, all the static information, laws and board rules and all of the stuff is here. We have given more clear indications, like documents are marked with icons like PDFs. It's easy to find if they are links or PDFs or Word documents and stuff like that. For example, there is a page here which would show a Word document, an Excel sheet, or a PDF, and it's just it's visually more indicative of what it is, things like that. Other than that, we also have some logged in pages. This is our current login page. If you log in, it's going to give the name here. So I'm not going to do that right now, but I'm showing those kind of stuff can also happen here. We also implemented a search. So we did a Google search engine integration here. So it's going to bring up all sorts of search results from our site into a consolidated pop-up like this. And people can search. It's a full text search powered by Google. So we have implemented that. Obviously, we are still improving the looks of it and all that stuff. It's still in works, but that's also part of this new site. These are the online application buttons and all the online applications that we have. And one of them is verifying a PT. So all of these applications have been given a new look, and while preserving the functionality. So if I search, this is exactly the same functionality, but everything has gotten a new look, and it's going to show everything as it's supposed to, right? So all that is working. So we have been there. What else did I have? Some other pages we have worked with to identify some important pages, like foreign trained or military application. They have a little bit of a different look and feel there, and where we have some information highlighted in different ways. So this is another look or layout that we have on the page as well. And this is the application landing page. The one other thing that I wanted to show was how this is going to look on a mobile device, right? So here, this is a simulation page where we can see our site showing in a mobile view, right? So this is going to be on a small screen. So there are components that can be viewed differently in the mobile depending on what page we are on. So instead of bigger buttons, it's going to have some smaller clickable areas, and more, so we can have so user doesn't have to scroll too much in a mobile to get to important parts of the page. So those are some things that we have done. So this is on a smaller mobile in different orientation. Let me show you the iPad one. See, this is the iPad with this is on the portrait mode, and then there is the landscape mode. We are still working on the menu to get it more structured and more smaller, because right now it's not fitting in correctly in the devices. So we are working out certain kinks like that. But pretty much this is what you would see. It's going to be like pretty much the layout is going to look really very similar on an iPad, and it works well as well. So that's the menu, and you would have other stuff that we have on the site. So things like that. So all of these are exactly the same functionality, but all of the look and feel has been approved or have been improved, sorry. And we are still trying to refine as much as possible anything that we are able to. So that's pretty much it. I wanted to show. I would really welcome anybody's feedback and feel free to point out stuff that needs to be corrected, changed, or any new ideas. I'm willing to implement them as well. That's here. So I'm
just really thrilled. This looks so much better. Wow, it's great. I love all the landing pages, the simplicity, the organization, the fact that it can be on an iPad or a phone. You've got all the good information in here. Right. Way to go. How much longer do you think you guys need before this can be go live?
For now we have two big pieces at least that we need to take a crack at. One is our online application. The other one is, I think, continuing competence. These are pretty big, and there is renewals as well, which from what I hear from Greg is a very big piece as well. So until we analyze those pieces, it's hard to say how long exactly, but I'm guessing another 2 to 3 weeks. Probably.
That would be
optimistic.
Yeah.
Optimistic, yeah.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we talked about what could we do with that. My thing was the page that we have now was just too busy. You couldn't, I can't look at it and see exactly what I want. This to me is awesome.
Yeah.
It ain't even finished and I love it already. It's not busy.
Yeah.
Right. So
I have to compliment the IT staff, and then Zalika and Debbie and some of the licensing staff, Kimberly, who have worked intensely on this every day. 10 o'clock, there's a meeting or whenever it is. I don't know when it is exactly, but so they've done a really great job, and as our Greg and David heads down on this security thing. So thanks to all of you for the work.
And I'll point out a couple of other cool things that she passed over a little bit. Before we had HTML pages, nowadays everything is converted into PHP, which is our background programming language. The cool thing about that is we can put things in like page trackers. We can know, for example, if we wanted to know what count, how many times this page was hit or any page was hit, we could do that. We've deprecated some things that would slow us down. Older technology, those things are going away. We're replacing it with newer ways of doing things. Every page can be logged into. If you notice at the top of every page that she showed, the pages, a person can log in right there and they can log out right there. So, so we're moving towards we're making more than just a website change. We're also trying to make the back end sort of more responsive as well. So I'm glad you guys like it.
Yeah.
Good job. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right. Well, I think we can let you guys go, and we're going to finish the rest of the business of the meeting today. So thanks for coming and presenting.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye. Good to see you all again. Bye.
Bye.
So that was kind of fun. I think, in terms of time frame, it is really hard to estimate because we do have some really huge tools in the background that have to work. And continuing competence is like the most gigantic spreadsheet you've ever created. And so that all has to work. But I think if they were going to aim at something, you know, having it working a month before renewals would be the most awesome thing ever. Because then they would be renewing on the new website, you know, reporting, continuing competence on the new website, renewals, et cetera. So, you know, we can hope for certainly sooner, but that would be optimal.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as a couple of last things here, there's just some information again about CLEAR. We're members of CLEAR. They also have a ton of educational opportunities and regulatory information if you want to participate in that. There's no new news from FCCPT, so all quiet on the credential or foreign trained credentialing front, which is good. I did want to point out a couple of the correspondence things that I've included. I've tried to cut these down to really either very unusual or interesting or things that, you know, would be useful for you to know. This Justice for All one is kind of interesting. I've gotten a couple more of these lately, and I don't know why that's not showing up here. Just a moment. I'll shorten it by saying I am getting, you know, unidentified or you know, anonymous pictures of licensees of their Facebook pages and people reporting that unprofessional behavior and that kind of thing. And I think while there's nothing to be done about it because there's no specific information that's being provided, it's just more that, you know, I personally titled it perception issue. You know, when you're posting all kinds of interesting personal information on your web page, people in the public are looking at that as how unprofessional is that person. And so it's just an interesting commentary from the public about licensees. We already talked about this one related to phonophoresis earlier with over-the-counter medication. That's some additional, just the email exchange that we had. And then Stephen Ashenfar asked me about Lucia light therapy, and I don't know anything about that and could not find anything about it. So, you know, I really wasn't able to address that question. So just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about what we've, kinds of things that are submitted to the board office to address. Then lastly here, we need to talk about the next couple of meetings. We've already got September and December scheduled, but we need to go ahead and look at March of 2022 and June of 2022. So if you click into that, you can see the Wednesdays or Thursdays in March. And the holidays, the associated holidays with those. So, you know, March 2nd is Ash Wednesday. If that's not an optimal day, we wouldn't want to pick that. I think Lent.
What do we do now, the second week?
Ma'am?
What are we doing now, the second week in the month? The Wednesday?
Sometimes we pick the second week. Yeah, I mean that's probably on average. Although recently we've done a few meetings during the first week of the month, just depending on what was most appropriate for everyone. So, would you like the first week of the month, Pearl, or the second week of the month?
The second week Wednesday, like it is
March 16th.
No, is that March?
That'd be the 9th, I think.
Right.
And does anybody else, how does March 9th with the Wednesday, how does that work for everybody in 2022?
Fine.
That's
That. All right. And then similarly, June of 2022, we could go with the second Wednesday, which would be June 8th. Unless there are any objections.
Mhm.
Okay. There's still time if someone just, comes to the next meeting or lets us know that those are not great, we can adjust that. There's still a little time before those meetings. So thank you for that. And is there anything else that we have not covered that anybody else needs to bring up or we need to discuss today?
Kathy, I'm sorry, I was putting in my computer the March meeting. Did you say June 13th?
June 9th.
Oh, I'm sorry, June
8th.
June 8th, yes.
June 8th. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Is there any other business to come before the board or any other questions for the executive director?
Well, Teresa, I have a question for you. I don't know if I have to ask you at a board meeting, but in September, I need to attend remotely because I'm going to be out of town. Is that okay?
Yes, I'm sure we could Zoom you in or something. I don't know, Cindy or Kathy, David, we'll figure that out by then.
Okay, thank you.
David and I have talked about practicing already because we'll be downstairs at that point.
That's right.
The other thing I just want to remind everybody of is the initial email that I sent contains the vouchers for the meeting. So you want to go ahead and find that. If you can't find it, certainly shoot an email to myself, Cindy, Paula, any of us can help you with that. And
who should we send those back to?
Cindy.
Cindy. Hi, Cindy.
Cindy's writing check. She's still the one that's paying you.
All right, that's great.
And David Null sent like the links again this morning. That helped a lot. And also the ClickUp, because when I log into ClickUp, it doesn't bring me to today's meeting unless I use the folder he gave me.
Yeah, you have to use the current folder to get to it.
So
all right.
It was nice that he sent it.
That's good information to have. That should be part of kind of our preliminaries, is making sure that David is sending that out the morning of. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And Paula, thank you for joining our meeting for your first official board meeting today.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Okay, if there's no other business to come before this board, the July quarterly meeting of the North Carolina Board of PT Examiners is now adjourned at 3:20.